I knew it needed to be LS, and I wanted to use the Holley components in order to install the LS. So the pan that they make is great. The 302-2 is what I used. All of their mounts are fantastic. They have mounts for the earlier 67s like mine, because for those of you that don't know, 67, there was no big block available. And so the frame rails are not clearanced the same way in 67 as they are in 68 and newer.
Yo, what up, C10 Nation? This is Ronnie from C10 Talk. C10 Talk is one of those podcast things. We talk C10 trucks, tech, and people. That's right, people. Because it's the people that make the scene so rad ass. The trucks are cool, but the people are cooler. You can check out the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, C10Talk.com, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thanks for checking out our latest video and being part of the C10 Nation. What's up? What's up? Back behind the mic, no stranger to the pod. We've got Jim Pickering. Jim, dude, you're hustling and bustling all the time. You know, we had you on with the square body, how to build and modify. Now, you know, some people might say a little bit of the wrong order, but it doesn't really matter at this point. I think the 67 to 72s are just as hot as ever. And I would almost venture to say that, well, here, I'm just going to say welcome to the pod and thanks as always. We'll start that way.
Well, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
You know, what I was going to say is I think it almost is better the way that it happened, and it's just meant to be, because if you would have done this 5 years ago, you might not have put some of the things, obviously, that you put in, like the way you went about getting your truck. So finding a 67 3/4 ton long bed, obviously I don't need to say it's a long bed from the perspective of 3/4 ton because they didn't make a short bed, but that allowed you, or that influenced the book based upon cutting a bed, you know, the way that you converted it from C20 to C10. And I really think that that's the way to go, right? You can find, I just had Derek from Vice Grip Garage on, and we're like, dude, you can still find a decent long bed, and it might be a little bit overpriced, but if you get something that doesn't have a lot of cancer, all the panels are matching, you're looking at gold, you know, because now with the likes of Metalox and cutting things down, and this book right here, Chevy GMC Trucks 1967 through 72, how to build and modify. This literally is a Bible of telling you exactly what you have to do. And for sure, 10 years ago, but probably 5 years ago, half of that stuff wouldn't be in there. So it worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in all fairness, when I first talked with the people at CarTech, that's what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to do 67 to 72 initially. And I told them no, because at that point, this is 2018, I suppose it was, I didn't think I'd be able to find one. I just finished restoring a 72 K10, orange and white, super. I loved that truck.
Yeah.
But I'd already done all the work and I didn't have the photos that I would need to do it or to write the book. And so I said, no, guys, it's not going to work. But I've been watching the market because of the job I had at the time, watching the market for classic cars. I was watching the prices come up on the square bodies. And I thought, well, geez, why don't we just start with that? I mean, I can probably get one of those for a more reasonable price, which will allow me to have more budget to actually do the stuff to build it, right? So that's how that book came about. After the success of that book, they really wanted me to do another one. And I said, okay, well, maybe we can do 67 to 72, because by that point, I'd met some people, one guy in particular who has a wrecking yard up in the Tri-Cities up in Washington, who had a bunch of these trucks. And he wasn't asking big prices for them because there were a lot of them. And there's when you get out into that part of the country, there are a lot of them, because that's, you know, you got a lot of farmland out there and you got a lot of people that were using these trucks, and the value isn't exactly the same proposition, especially for a 3/4 ton. And so I was able to go up there and take a look at the stuff he had, and I found this one. And like you said, it was a 3/4 ton flatbed. It was a factory flatbed. And, you know, it wasn't particularly expensive, but what I liked about it was mostly original paint. I mean, it didn't have a bed, right, because it was flatbed, but from the cab forward, everything was pretty much evenly worn. And I thought, okay, that's the look I'm going for, and we'll just start there. So that's how it worked out. And like you said, I mean, being able to go through the process of doing the other one first definitely changed my opinion of what should be in this one.
Yeah, would you, if you could, or when you were looking, were you trying to find a complete truck, not a flatbed, meaning obviously a bedside truck, and just couldn't? And once you saw the blue and you said, "Hey, this is the patina on this truck is spot on. I'll figure it out. I'll make it work." And honestly, another good segment is, "Hey, this thing doesn't even have a bed. I can show the audience and the reader how to make that happen."
Exactly. So I knew out of the gate with 73 to 87, the one thing I wish that I had done was actually cut down a bed. I got lucky enough to find a factory short bed that was original paint, it was all flat, just needed to be buffed, and it came up and it looked great, right? So I knew that I wanted to do a bed no matter what. So to me, no bed didn't matter because I was going to have to chop it up anyway. This truck, the reason I liked it, not just the fact that it was a 67 and it's this medium blue, which I think is a 67, 68 only option. It's a very, very base model truck. It's only got one sun visor, doesn't have a cigarette lighter, no radio. I mean, it's as base model as you can get, which is like the antithesis of buying a truck today, right? Everything's got leather and cup holders and electric this and power that. And this is so much more fun for me because it's just so different. But I went ahead and picked this one mostly because it wasn't rusty at all. And things up in the Tri-Cities, it's like high desert up there, right? And so the stuff that's out there, it generally ages pretty well. And even up behind the windshield, this thing is nice and solid, which I know in Arizona, you guys probably see that fairly often, but up here in the Pacific Northwest, they tend to all rust in the same places. And in my book, there's pictures of some of the trucks that I went to look at that I just took my camera with me, and trucks that came from the coast where the roof panel is separating from the windshield posts. I mean, it was, some of those trucks were pretty rough. And I didn't want to get into too much of that. I wanted to do the fun stuff. So yeah, the fact that it didn't have a bed didn't bother me because I was going to have to cut one anyway. And that was a learning experience, but I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute.
Well, one thing to kind of not skip over, first and foremost, I don't even know what the word antithesis is, but I like the way you said it. It sounded great. Obviously, people buy trucks now; they want a lot of bells and whistles. Your truck has no cigarette lighter. I had a 69 that I had that was the same. The only thing the guy spent any money on was he bought the 292 inline six.
Gotcha.
But why those trucks to me are just money, meaning I love it, is when you don't have a radio, you have a radio delete in your dash, so you don't even have a cut. Now, it is funny that they cut they put a piece in there and you had a radio delete piece, but then without a radio, you don't have a cowl antenna. So you don't even
Right.
have an antenna on the cowl. And then to think that some guy at some dealership with a carbon copy thing was writing down, well, I mean, I would love to know, what did a cigarette lighter cost? Like, okay, cool, you don't smoke. Now we just need power. And nobody at that point was thinking, oh, I'm gonna use it for power. At least I
Right.
don't think they did. But nonetheless, to think, I would think it would probably, I mean, granted, in 1967, that truck, 3/4 ton, might have been 2,400, $2,500 maybe. So to think, it just cracks me up that they couldn't just come up with that extra $2. Like $2 for that cigarette lighter is just gonna be, nope, no, we're not getting that, so not having a radio, not having a cigarette lighter, which obviously you can add so easy, it is cool. Now, again, another thing that we're going to talk about that your truck didn't have, because it was such a low option truck, is no AC. So you don't have AC, and you get the fun of going through that. So that truck literally is almost just a perfect truck for you to do the book on. And again, it just absolutely worked out. The other
Yeah.
thing that I do think is kind of funny, which I would love to have, is it didn't end up having cab lights, correct?
No cab lights. Right.
Yeah, so you lucked out there for the look that you were going for, but I've got a 3/4 ton that is a 72 3/4 ton that someday I'll put cab lights on it. And now for the audience, you can get the metal pieces. You don't have to go harvest a full
Yeah.
cab skin. You can get those, aftermarket. So love me some cab lights on a 67 72. On a square, it's just an add-on. There is no metal change. They figured that out. So true 6772 for the audience again will have an actual different cab metal forming for those chicken lights.
Yeah, different roof skin.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was so cool about this truck after I got it, I think it must have been a fleet truck, because you could see on the door there was what was left of AC&S, and I couldn't figure out for a while what that was. I finally was able to track it down, and AC&S was a company that installed asbestos insulation on pipes. And I thought, well, okay, that's wonderful. And because of where the truck was in the Tri-Cities, the guy's yard was full of stuff that had been used on the Hanford Reservation. And I thought, oh, okay, this truck probably installed asbestos insulation on pipes out at Hanford. And I
Where's
found that
what do you say, Hanford, for the audience? That's just is that a reservation?
it's where the United States made all their plutonium for the first nuclear weapons. And it is
Wow.
extremely dirty. It's it's taking years for them to clean it up, and I don't know if they're anywhere near cleaning it up. So, of course, first thing we did, we bring the thing home. I leave it at my dad's place, and he gets out the leaf blower and just cleans it out. Big old dust cloud, you know.
Asbestos, plutonium, dust
Yeah,
cloud.
right.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, nuclear asbestos. It's wonderful. Anyway, so yeah, finding out the history of this stuff is always fascinating. The things that you find in them, you know.
Did you Google that, the ACN, and you ended up kind of and did you ever think like, hey, I should relogo this, or did you ever harvest anything? And was
Now,
it on both doors?
it's on both doors,
Okay,
but the doors are, you could just barely see it. I haven't messed with them at all. I just left it alone. The only reason I was able to find anything out about it at all is it was referenced in a couple of legal filings. The company's gone. I think it was
sure.
bought. They changed the name, and who knows what happened after that. But yeah, so there you go. That's the history of this one anyway.
Well, again, jumping, it's easy to interview you because all we have to do is just put the book right in front of my face. And for the audience, I've got one right here. Thank you, Jim. And I do love that we know, the kind of the joke is that the next gen 73 to 87, you've done your book on it, is the square body, but it actually, the nickname from GM, or the name, was the rounded line.
Right.
And they did all these wind tunnel tests, and people don't realize that they're actually more aerodynamic than the 67 to 72, which leads me to chapter 1 right here, is the action line. And
Action
for
line.
the audience, you've maybe seen some posting, some different old I guess marketing stuff. There's a couple cool action line things, but it's funny to think that a 67 to 72 is the action line. And really, there really never was a nickname for this truck. Nothing ever stuck, I guess. Maybe they just called it the C10 or the Cheyenne, maybe the CST. But
Mhm.
when you think about Fords, for the audience who doesn't, isn't listening to this because they want to hear about Ford stuff, but Ford has a nickname for pretty much every truck, which is Chev doesn't. They got square body, and that's the one and only that I can, kind of think of. They just don't have nicknames like Ford has a nickname for every damn era of truck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, there's always the OBS, but everybody argues about what that really means.
I'll tell you what that means if you ever really, really want to know. But the difference is, for the OBS, is that's both generations. That's actually Ford and Chevy. And in a real, I think my audience has probably heard it, but just think, in 1997, the forums came out and the new trucks came out, and so everybody said, well, that's the old body style. Well, that's the new body style, because an 88 to 98 is not old by any means. I mean, it is now 30 years old, but it's not that old. So yeah, I digress. All right. So the action line, we started off, you give a little bit of the history, you kind of dive in. So for you guys out there that are thinking about buying a truck, it's perfect. And I've got a guy, I'm just going to call him Willie because that's his name. I talk about him on the pod for probably 10 years, and I'll tell you why. And this book, I'm going to tell him to buy his own, but he's going to buy this book. And I'll tell you, he forever is exactly the same age. He's 50 years old, and he bugs me all the time how he wants a 67 to 72. And he really kind of I would say he kind of wants more of a 69 to 72. Well, he just never would buy one, right? Too cheap, couldn't find the right deal, the same stuff that you're going through. And finally, about a month ago, he bought one because he just knows if he doesn't buy one, they're not going to get any cheaper. And he bought a long bed, and it's a half ton, and it's got a different motor. There was a big block that was put in it at some point. I would say it's an 8.5 on a 10. It's an Arizona rust-free truck. It's got great bones. And this is exactly for you in the audience. You can still make it happen. You're probably going to have to do more work than you want, but by doing that work, you're going to have so much fun along the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Get out of town. Go as far away as you can, and go find a truck that's out in the country somewhere. Because there's a lot of them out there, and it might be a 3/4 ton, it might be a 1 ton. I mean, you can basically build whatever you want out of one of these, and that's what I was doing my best to try to show with this. And that section that we talk about with the history, my goal there was to give a little bit of the background on each of the trucks, but also show which parts are rare, so that if you're going to build something like this and you're going to start hacking away on it, and you find a truck that's got some truly rare options on it, maybe you'll think twice and find one that's not so rare. So when you look at that section, you'll see that there's stuff that I list out, some of the more rare options, just so that people know what's scarce, I guess.
Yeah, and the cool thing is when you go through the history, he's got all the numbers. So you don't really think about the numbers being that great and until you look at it and you're like, wow, they made a lot of these trucks. Wow, they just made so many of these trucks. And looking at the numbers, to be honest, they made a lot less GMCs for sure. So,
Yes,
I
they did.
mean, wow, when you look at the numbers, and just to give the audience a little perspective, 67, you've got 375 Chevs, you've got 130. So you're looking at a third there. And it's pretty much a third across the board when you think about it. Going into 69, 560,000 Chevs, 150 GMC. And then when you get all the way up into 72, you've got 600, just over 600,000 Chevs, and you've got 132 GMCs. So the GMCs are few and far between based upon how many Chevrolets are out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What was something that you found that was such a rare option? I think obviously a 69 Blazer is going to be a pretty rare option. You do see the 50th anniversaries, even though I think I see more long bed 50th anniversaries than I do shorties. And then I think the creme de creme, man, I think would have to be a 68 anniversary short bed.
Hmm.
I don't think they did a 396 in those trucks. I don't 327 it would be the one you'd want. So yeah, I don't know if they did do a 396 in those. I don't recall, which was the big block for the 67 68s. But yeah, if you could find that, that's going to be, pretty much your rarest. And then maybe getting into some of those Blazers with some of those sticker packages. But
Yeah, the
other
sticker packages for sure. There's definitely some color options that are kind of hard to find. My K10 that I had that was a factory Cheyenne Super was orange with a black top, which was interesting. And the only option it had was the full wheel covers, the PO1 full wheel covers, which was cool. And I mean, it was a tack dash truck. It had some cool options on it, but other than those things, there was nothing else there. So I think, finding any of the black ones from back in the day are pretty cool. I love the toolbox door, which you don't see a lot of. In fact, that's how I found this truck. Was my 72 had a rusty toolbox door, and I needed one that wasn't rusty, and I tracked it down to this guy's yard, and that's how I met him. So
I had a 60, a 70 now, and I sold it. I called it Goldie Hawn. It left about a year ago, but it had a tool. It was mint. It was so cherry, and it had a toolbox door. And I am not a fan of toolbox doors at all. I
they're
just
hard to
don't.
pick.
I just don't like the change of the line. One
Uh-huh.
thing that and I don't want to dive too far away into it, but the one thing I don't see that would be kind of rare that you didn't really hit much on, but would be something, and maybe you know a little bit more about it, but is in 72 they they were getting ready for the new model truck. Okay, so they're getting ready for the square bodies, and if I'm right, which listening to Paul Hitch, who's now, I've interviewed him a few times, he's passed, and some of the
Mhm.
foreign stuff, forum stuff, they were really trying to have the new square body trucks ready for 72, and
Mhm.
they didn't. So what they did is they ramp up, they do the 72 and they do the Cheyenne Super. Well, the big package that they did at the end to push these trucks out was the Highlander packages,
Right.
which is a cool, and for the audience, that means you're going to have all parchment,
Mhm.
So your white, you're gonna have a black dash pad, color matching metal dash, black carpet, parchment interior, which is going to be your white interior, and then you had four colorways that were available, which is a green, orange, a blue, and a gray on the
Mhm.
Highlander. So those are super cool. If you ever see a Highlander truck, an original Highlander truck, those are something that you don't see them that often.
Yeah, and I wouldn't cut one up.
Yeah, I would. I actually a funny story. So I have a Highlander 72 Blazer,
Mhm.
and it didn't say Highlander on the SPID. Well, my daughter wants to borrow it. She's like, "Can I drive it during my senior year or whatever?" And I said, "Okay." She goes, "Can I take the seat covers off?" She take the seat cover off. I got home. I about died.
I bet.
Yeah, yeah. I was completely like, "Are you shitting me?" I'm like, "Oh my God, this is a freaking Highlander." And then I dove in on the SPID, and sure enough, because I've seen trucks that said Highlander, and the Blazer did not say Highlander, but it did have the right SPID number, and it,
Uh-huh.
corresponding's all matched. So, all right, so getting started into chapter two. Um, and I guess before we jump into that, would you say that this was easier of a book to write, or was it a little harder?
It was harder, but it wasn't because of the truck. It was because of COVID and everything that happened with that. I mean, it was a longer process for me because parts supply was a more challenging thing, and it was for everybody. And having my kids at home all the time made it a challenge. And so, yeah, I think, but it was in terms of the work done. Cutting the bed down was more of a challenge because I hadn't done one of those before. Cutting the frame was a challenge. I hadn't done that before. And those were the things that you had to figure out the proper way to do it and to teach yourself how to do it before you teach everybody else how to do it. And that I wanted to come at it from that standpoint because the people that are going to be doing this project are just like me. They're going to be learning how to do this too. And if I can do it, they can do it, right? And that was the basis of a lot of it. But yeah, I think in terms of the truck itself, it was more of a challenge. Yeah.
Well, and again, I think that almost goes back to what we talked about at the beginning was you were confident because you had already built your K10. You
Yep.
went through everything with the square body, and then you probably had some confidence, but you I like that you challenge yourself to go outside of that in that you're like, well, here, I'm going crazy on this. I mean, I'm
We're
gonna
going to do it
take
all.
a
Yeah.
flatbed, I'm gonna make it a short bed, I'm gonna convert it from C20 to C10. And that's a big thing. People don't realize that it's really not that much to do to
Yeah.
convert a C20 to a C10. I often laugh when somebody goes to tell me like, well, that's a C20 or a C30. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the same damn thing. It's really
Yeah.
not that much different. There, you can,
The,
it's literally Legos. It's all interchangeable.
right. Right. Yeah, it was the most challenging part for me with figuring out what I was going to do, taking it from a C20 to a C10 was locating aftermarket parts that I could be sure would work. For example, the frame. Everybody says the frame on a C20 is a little bit thicker than a C10, right? There's an awful lot of misinformation out there about that, or people just don't know the difference. And so I called up the people at Ride Tech because their C notch in the back slides over the frame. It's an actual C channel, which means if it's designed for a C10 and the frame on a C20 is thicker, is it going to fit? I didn't know. They couldn't tell me. They'd had customers that had done it before that said that they thought it was fine. But again, definitively, there just wasn't information out there that I could find that said, here is exactly what you need to know. Here is exactly what's different between this one and that one. And so that's kind of what I set out to do. I said, all right, well, if they don't know, if I can't figure this out, I'm just going to do it. We're going to see what happens. And it worked. Everything was fine. So it was stuff like that. I think that was the most challenging right out of the gate was just kind of figuring out the path forward and going for it.
So I think, and I had a 71 tow truck that was a C30, and the 30s are definitely bigger.
30s are
The
different. Yeah.
the one thing I would wonder on yours, I almost feel like because yours was just a 20 and it
Mm-hmm.
was a single rear wheel, that
Mm-hmm.
that makes a huge difference, is that's gonna be just a standard chassis. When you
Yep.
go to the 30, almost like with Yellowstone, my 73, they go from 8 inch to like 11 inch,
Yeah,
and they
very different.
and they do that under the cab, and then they narrow it, and then it goes to 8, and then and so on yours, I believe on a on a 67, it's almost like a heavy half, even though it's a
Yeah,
C20.
right.
Yeah, it would be it obviously in not to skip ahead, but it worked perfect because
Yeah.
at the C notch, it's the same exact. And I don't think unless you looked at underneath your cab and measured it, I assume it's the same because I've had some different 3/4 tons, but for the most part, yeah, unless you're getting into that 1 ton where they
Mhm.
really got bigger on the chassis, it's quite a bit bigger.
Yeah.
And I know on the square bodies as well, like on Yellowstone, we had to make a C notch just because it was so big back there compared to a normal half ton.
Well, what I found was that the 3/4 ton frames are in fact thicker. I took a caliper out to a wrecking yard to double check because I had mine. I knew what it was. And but despite the fact that the steel was thicker, the measurements ended up working out just fine.
Cool.
So there you go.
Yeah. Nice, nice. And okay, so getting started, you got to find a truck. What I always tell people is I get once a week somebody wants to buy a C10. Okay, I want
Uh-huh.
to buy a C10. What can and I say, listen, you have to figure out what you want. Do I want an SUV? Do I want a Blazer? Do I want a Suburban? Do I want a 3/4 ton? Do I want a 4-wheel drive? Do I like this style? Do I want a square body? Do I want a slope nose square body? Do I want square headlights? Do I want round headlights? Once you figure out what you want, then we can narrow down what you're going to get. Like,
Right.
and I love that you did the 67, 68 because that is such a beautiful style, and there's a lot of them out there that are still available in a bigger truck, and you can convert it and do exactly what you did, make it a little shorty.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of them out there. But again, I mean, you have to be able to know where to look and what to look for. And these trucks, as most of us already know, they all rust in the same places. And fixing that rust is really not generally not that big of a deal, depending on how bad it really is, um, and what your skill level is. But again, I mean, your skill level can evolve with the truck, and it should evolve with the truck. There's really no reason why you can't learn how to do these things and just do them.
Yeah, and I wish that we could I wish we could take a little radar thing and go, okay, this is this much rust, this is this much cancer, this is going to cost you this much in rust repair if you did it yourself. This is going to cost you this much if you pay 65 to 125 an hour, whatever, right? Well,
Yeah,
because I get so many people that are literally just like, well, how much is that going to cost? And it's like, well, I don't want to pay that. I'm like, do you understand that that extra 2 grand, maybe extra 3 grand is worth 10 grand of your time and labor.
yeah,
So just buy that truck because that other one you sent me is trouble, right? And if I can see that much rust, there's going to be more. There's always dirty secrets. There's
yeah.
always dirty secrets.
We talk about this a lot at my day job, actually, at the magazine. You have to figure out what it is that you're doing and why. If you're buying a truck because you want a truck, that's great. If you're buying a truck because you want a project, that's a different it's a different end goal. It's a different beginning goal. And so it comes down to where you're finding the value in your time and where you're going to get your most enjoyment out of the process. I've learned over the years, it's funny, when I was, a younger guy, my dad and I were working on a car when I was in high school. I still have it. Um, and, I was itching to get it done. I want to go drive it. I want to have fun with it. And he's a process guy. He wanted to have fun and build it with me. And it took me a long time to get there, but I figured out that I'm kind of the same way. I like building stuff. And, if you like building stuff, then there's really no reason why you shouldn't go, instead of spending the 125 an hour for 4, 5, 6 hours paying somebody, go buy a welder, you know, figure out how to weld. There's really no
Yeah.
reason why you shouldn't.
Well, and you're going to get a trade, you're going to pick up some confidence and some skill,
Yeah.
and whoever's listening out there who's thinking about it, you know that there's somebody else that can do it, that you're just as sharp as they are. Okay, let's just face it, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. And I'm not saying I'm a master welder by any means, but you can do it, and the more you do it, the better you can get. And the other thing really is you're going to stay married because you're going to be out in the garage, you're not going to be annoying your wife and kids, and you're going to have a good time. And I just got off a pod, and it was funny because sometimes I think people enjoy the build more than they enjoy the end result. They just want to build the trucks, they want to get that chassis, they want to see it, they want to live it, and you're giving them the footnotes to, instead of the cliff notes, it's the gym notes to what we're doing here, and it's really a bible to walk them through that.
Yeah, yeah. The goal is to make people understand that it's not as hard as it seems like it is. It's fairly straightforward. And one of the things when I was wrenching professionally when I was a younger guy, one of the things that the older wrenches that the older techs that I worked with would always say is that if you can fix a car, you can fix anything. You can fix a washing machine. You can fix the plumbing in your house. You can do some electrical work. It's because it's all the same, right? Once you understand the fundamentals of how things are supposed to work, it's not that hard to fix just about anything. So something like this it shouldn't be that intimidating because it's really not that challenging. It's just time and it's problem solving. You solve one problem, move on to the next one. Solve the next problem, move on to the next one. Before you know it, you've got a cool truck.
Well, and the cool thing about, this generation and really all C10s is there's already somebody that's done it 100 times over.
Yep.
And with the internet and the YouTubes and everything else, there's not that much that you're not going to have as a resource. So whether it's your gym notes, whether it's your YouTube, friend, phone a friend, it doesn't matter. There's going to be somebody who's done it. And again, it is Legos. That's why people love. They look great, but people love it because it's pretty basic.
Yep.
Okay, so now we get into the body and disassembly fixes and modifications. I gotta feel like this is a chapter that I sure would hope that whoever is thinking about it, whoever's going through it, is really taking their time. And I like what you said. It's like, hey, my dad taught me it's can be a process. Find the right baggies, find the right. I like the little rigid boxes, the husky boxes. I get them. They got the trays. They're cheap. They used to be $9.99. I buy them at Christmas for, now they're probably like $15.99, but still worth it. And you can label them and put all your crap in there. And if you take the time on the front end, it's going to pay dividends on the back end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're waiting on parts or something, start cleaning some bolts. Have them ready to go. It makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And bagging and tagging will change your life if you haven't done it before. Once you start doing it, you'll never go back. Hunting down nuts and bolts and things, it's not that's no fun.
Well, and I don't remember what I paid, and I don't really like the one that I have. It's a Harbor Freight. It's the big nut and bolt cleaner with the little walnuts in it. And the
Yeah,
problem is it's got like a plastic lid, so it vibrates all damn night, and then the lid like gets a hole in it.
yeah,
But if you've got one of those or get one of those, they're cheap. I'd like to see if there's, I should probably just somehow make a metal lid because the plastic lid just, but it's full of crushed walnuts. You throw all your bolts in there, you let it run all night, you
each
get
one.
done, and they're all cleaned up and they're really good. And you could buy a little tap and die if you need to rethread some stuff. But that's somewhat elementary. You're putting it in there, you've got a process, you're throwing your nuts and bolts in there because those old nuts and bolts, they're still good. You're just taking them out. They're not like they're destroyed. There's a
Yep.
lot that you can recycle with that and save yourself some money and have a good time doing it. And know that well, those are original nuts and bolts.
Yeah, and they came from the right spot, so they go. That they'll fit. Everything's the right size and length and all that. I've had good luck with just a wire wheel chucked up in a drill. And you take your bolt and you put it in the vise and you just go around it with a wire wheel. You know, that does a pretty good job too. So there's lots of ways to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And the internet will help with that. One question that I wonder if you get a lot, or I guess we can just throw this out there, but is I think my truck was painted. Really? What makes you think that? Let me look at it. Okay, look at it. Okay, look at this has red oxide. This has this different red primer underneath it, and this has this black primer underneath it. You're like, okay, well
Uh-huh.
that's how they did it.
That's
So
how they did it.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
how they
So
did it. Yeah.
so
So from what I understand, the cabs and the beds were painted in different places, and they used whatever they could find. Knowing what I know about the factory, it doesn't matter to them if it's red oxide or black. They're just going to use whatever they can to get the truck done and out the door. And so that's one of the things I liked about this truck was that it had the red oxide on the doors and it had the black under the fenders. I thought, well, there you go. That's right. You
And
know,
for the audience, the way I know it is exactly what he's saying, but it's pretty consistent. So your cab and your doors are going to have red oxide, and your front fenders and your rear is all going to be your black primer underneath it. So that's why you'll see what you see. If you see a red oxide, I would assume almost more ironically that was painted because
yeah,
you won't. I don't remember ever seeing a non-painted truck that was red oxide in the front and or the back fenders to match. So that would be unique. But yeah, I'm sure you get that as well. How
Mhm.
about sourcing that long bed? Was it tough finding a clean long bed?
It's funny. I found it on I think it was either Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, and it was a guy he had a company not far from here where I live, and somebody had dumped a truck in front of his business, and it was a 68 GMC, and he was able to get a lost title, or he's able to file to get a lien title, and was able to get the truck, and he was going to convert it to a short bed, and his plan was he was going to cut the bed down, and he kind of took a look at it and thought, oh, this is going to be too much work. I'm kind of afraid to do it. So he went and bought all the parts. I think he bought AMD parts. So he got the bed sides and the floor and everything, and he was good to go. And he sold me the bed knowing that I was going to cut it down. And it had been, the truck had had a camper in it, a sliding camper. And so the bed was in great shape because it had never been, rarely been used to haul stuff. And so that's where it came from. And I think the guy regretted selling it to me after I took it from him, because he's like, these things are hard to find, in good shape. I said, yeah, I know. That's why I bought yours.
So what'd you pay for that bed?
$600.
Okay. So it's for the audience. This is my rant of 2 cents on this, but same exact scenario. Another guy at work, he since sold the truck. He's like, I want this truck. So we find him a 68. It's a 3/4 ton. I have the bed. Okay. Because he did not want the bed and he wanted to buy the aftermarket bed. And I said, listen, even if you pay Kyle, because obviously we're in Arizona, or you do it yourself, he's got a welder, he could do it. I said, you're going to have the same color vehicle bed that you have with your cab. Now you're going to have to go and paint it and do all this stuff. And you're going to have, so I wonder what is your thoughts, your opinion? Is it better to find a bed and source an OG bed and cut it down so that you have that original metal? Or is it better to get all brand new sheet metal? Because I've never done that. And what I have heard, now I've heard great things about aftermarket sheet metal from beds, but you're looking at, like, nowadays, you're looking at probably 34 to 3,600 bucks.
Yeah.
You've got to do some tweaking, and now it's still going to have to get painted and so on and so forth, versus something that's just kind of patina that you can drive.
I think that it really comes down to the builder and what they are comfortable doing. For me, I'm not intimidated by hacking away at something because I'm pretty sure I can put it back together. But if you don't have the space and the time and, a place to make a mess, or you don't like using the death wheel, you don't want to get that close to it, then there's nothing wrong with going out and sourcing the new parts. They're going to fit and they're going to work just fine. And paint matching is probably as challenging as cutting a bed down if you really want to get technical about it, because it's so hard. It's so hard to get two colors, especially a color that's been out in the world for 50 years, right? Everything fades at its own rate. And if you have two pieces of metal that were together that whole time and they faded together, you're going to probably want to keep that together. So, but again, it comes down to what the builder's comfortable with.
Sure.
I don't think there's a wrong way to go about it. But for me, if I could have found a medium blue long bed, I would have gone that way. The only one I could find was red. So
yeah,
that's
it added to the book and the experience. The other thing that cracks me up is there has been a time that I had people reach out to me and tell me, I do want scars on my short bed. I want a bed. I want a truck that, who would have ever thought that 15, 20 years ago that people would be wanting scars on their truck? Like, no, I want that. I want scars. I'm like, really?
With mine, I left the center stake pockets. I wanted people to know. I left the center stake pockets, and I even left some of the welds on the inside of the bed where I put it back together to where you can see them, because I didn't want, and it still has C20 emblems on it. I wanted everybody to look at it and go, wait a minute, that's not right. And I've had it at shows, ever since I finished it, where people walk by and they take a second look at it and they go, well, that's not right. He must have body swapped it. I'm thinking, nope, that's a C20. It's just been hacked on a little bit.
Yeah, it makes for a good conversation, that's for sure. Dig your cab mount, your cab lift there. That's some Barney Rubble shit there. I don't know that I've seen that before.
I have to bring, this is my father's influence again, right? He worked as a dispatcher for a heavy machinery moving company for his whole career. And crib piles are a thing when you're moving heavy stuff, right? And so he has lots of leftovers, beams and steels and all kinds of stuff for moving heavy things. And this was his idea. How are we going to lift this thing? Well, I know how to do it. That's what we did. You don't need something special to pick up a cab. You really don't. You just have to understand where the weight is. It's going to want to tip forward on you because the windshield's heavy and everything that's on the cowl is heavy. And as long as you account for that, you could use just about anything to pick one up. This is just one way to do it.
Yeah, and for the audience looking at the picture, you've got the looks like a 4x6
Mhm.
stacked on top of some cribbing,
Yep,
and then it's not centered in the cab. It's pushed
on the front.
pretty far forward. And at this point, you still have it where the chassis still like right there.
Yeah.
But
We
yeah,
did it up high enough. We pulled the wheels off the back, got the cab up high enough to pull the frame out from underneath it, and then we lowered it back down using bottle jacks onto the wheel cart that we made for it. That
yeah,
was the goal.
it's funny in that picture. It looks like a four-wheel drive.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so then I literally have a one owner. I'm the second owner, 72 Cheyenne, and it has just as much rust as your truck, and it's never left the state of Arizona. So rockers are going to be bad. They're just
Yeah,
going to be bad. It's just a bad design. The water got down in there, and then obviously the other major, almost you can count on it, is going to be your right front fender because the battery is just going to leak battery acid. So it looks like you had the experience both of those.
yeah, and the cab corner too. Cab corner is an often problem, at least up here. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it
we
is
went.
down here too. You're right. The rear cab corners.
Yeah, I used all AMD stuff for that section, and it all fits really well. And surprisingly, if you haven't done it before, as long as you have some space and some of the tools, it's not that challenging. You just got to make sure you think about it ahead of time. You measure twice, and take your time. Right, one thing at a time, and you can work your way through it. It's not as bad as I think a lot of people make it out to be.
Well, and I see the confidence perspective of it, but if you're looking for some fun and you want to grow and have that fun, I don't know who said it, but they nailed it. They're like, hey, the good thing about metal and work is I can always just add more metal, right? So if I
Yeah,
cut too much, I can add a little bit more. And yeah, rockers would be, definitely one of those things where you're gonna and we both, you and I both, and the audience, I'm sure as well, you've seen some rocker jobs that are just horrendous. So I'm gonna tell you right now, you're probably not gonna do any worse than some of these rocker jobs I've seen where you open it and you're like, wow, that's where they
yeah.
seamed that together right there. And then you lift the carpet and you see some of the floor boards that they've done and just lay it on really thick, put some different metal in there and just weld away.
Something galvanized with pop rivets. There's a lot of that going around.
Cool. So what else did you experience on the metal? Obviously, you reached out to Kyle and you
Yeah,
watched his tutorial on how to do it.
absolutely. So
What would you
I
on
reached out
a scale of 1 to 10? What would you rate that experience?
in terms of what, challenging or fun?
But I would say probably challenging.
It was definitely, I'd say, probably a 6 out of 10 on challenging for somebody like me. The very first thing I did was call up a buddy of mine who was my paint and body guy, and I asked him if he had some spare metal laying around, and he gave me a door skin off of an El Camino. And I brought that door skin home, and I took my death wheel and I cut it in half and welded it back together. Cut it in half, welded it back together as many times as I could, so that I could teach myself the settings and teach myself the method for doing it and not warping anything. Because the door skin on the El Camino was about the same thickness as what you'd find on this truck, and it worked out great. After I'd had a chance to really test my equipment and my skills on something that didn't matter, it made all the difference. But the biggest challenge I think for me with regard to cutting the bed down was making sure I had all the measurements in the right places. My bed had been run into a couple times in the back, so that whole area around the taillights was not perfect when I cut it apart, which made it a little bit of a challenge to put it back together again, because basically you're cutting through half a dent and scooting it forward, and now you've got metal that is dented on one side and nice and smooth on the other. That was a little bit of a challenge. Um, and probably the biggest thing for me was going slow enough to not burn holes in it. And you learn about that with your test section. If you get yourself a door skin or whatever, but you get excited and you get moving really fast, or at least I did, and had to remind myself to slow down. And but again, I mean, I had the method figured out, and I'd watched Kyle's video any number of times, and I talked to him ahead of time to let him know what I was doing. I didn't want to give away any of his measurements, because at that time the video, you had to buy the video. It wasn't out on his website. I didn't want to give any of that away. I wanted to send people his way because he's got the method. He's figured this out, and I just wanted to show that it's easy to do if you take the time and are willing to give it a shot. Um, but yeah, I mean, it worked out fine when I got done with it. They were both exactly the same length. I was amazed. but it all worked out just well, just fine. So the bigger challenge, I think, of the whole thing was sorting out how I was going to do the bed floor, because there was no video out for the bed floor. I just had to take a look at it and figure it out. And I came up with a method that's in the book, that allows you to keep some of the way the floor is designed on these trucks. It's got kind of the corrugated section in the back, and as you come into the cab, or at least the front panel, it flattens out. And a lot of people just hack them off, slide it forward, and bolt it in, and then you've got this corrugated section that's underneath that front panel, that header panel. And I figured out that if you run your cutting wheel right along the cross member underneath, you could take 2 inches out. I think it was 2 inches. I can't remember now. Slide it back in, weld it up, and then you still have that factory seam, factory look. So stuff like that, you just got to slow down and think about it. But it works out just fine if you do that.
Yeah, and that's what we did on Orange Slice, obviously a square body versus a 6772. But those beds, if you break down a square long bed square body, they're literally meant to be cut down. It is hilarious. It's all the stamping is there, and you do cut I think it's 14 inches from the front, so you shrink it there so that you get that paneling to be right. And the other thing on a square body is they have the filler for your fuel. Since you've got saddle tanks, you've got the two little small humps, and you want those to be in the right places as well. So you're dealing with that a little bit. And then you keep a little extra on the back so that you can fold it over and kind of keep that look. But it does look like you did a great job. Do you remember, are you using a Miller-Matic? What are you using?
I'm using a Lincoln SP170T.
Okay, have it right there.
It's a hand-me-down welder. Came from a buddy of mine who built hot rods for years and just decided he was done and got out of it. And I ended up with some of his equipment, and it's basically a MIG welder that runs on 220.
Yeah, yeah. So do you remember? Did you use 3.0 or 3.5?
Geez, I don't remember. I think it was 3.0.
And then do you remember like your speed and your heat setting and where you were at?
I'd have to go look. I went off of what was recommended, and
yeah,
from there.
Yeah,
Generally,
I do.
I aired on being just a little bit hotter, and then trying to hit it quickly and not put a lot of extra time into it. But again, you're going to probably have welders that listen to this pod. They're going to know a lot more about it than I do. This is just, getting it as close as I could.
Yeah, and we're not welders, and we don't pretend to be welders. So we're hobbyists. The other thing I do remember Kyle saying is how he could get such clean lines and everything. He just said hot and fast, hot and fast. So
yeah.
It sounds like and his fast and your fast. Okay, so then you cut it down, and this is another one. And another kit that is really good. Now, Kyle has a pretty good kit. Kyle and I actually kind of developed this when we were doing Orange Slice. And I do think it's a little pricey, not Kyle's shortening kit, but Brothers has a really, and it walks you through it, very specific. So if you feel like you're more comfortable with that, Kyle's is more of what I would call a fish plate. So going back to the old days, the way that we would do it is we would cut it, and then we would use a little fish plate, which is kind of a little triangulated plate to stiffen that up. And for the audience, another thing that's kind of known is, hell, after you get done shortening a long bed and fish plating it, you actually could end up cracking the other areas. You're not going to crack that area because you strengthen that area so much.
Right.
Yeah, and the Brothers, I don't know what that retails for. It is a very nice kit. It'll spoon feed you too, because it tells you exactly where to go. I want to say it's like $169. Maybe it's even more. I think
it's more, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, well, I don't quote me, but I think it's almost twice that now.
Okay. So yeah, it's a good kit. But depending on where you're at, Kyle's fish plate kit, which really you line up the holes, it gives you spots to weld it. You're good to go. A couple C clamps. I would say the difference is that you're going to do a little bit more of the research, which has already been done out there for you. Whereas the Brothers kit almost tells you like exactly because the way that it's built, it walks you through the whole thing.
But you do have to keep in mind, especially with the 6772s, that if you're building a 3/4 ton, most of those kits are built for half ton, and the cab mounts are in a different spot. So you've got to remember to move the cab mounts, because it's where you cut it is in the rear cab mount area.
Yeah, and another thing too, and I don't know if Kyle still has them, but he was doing cab mounts because of that. Another thing that we haven't really talked about was this truck was a rear leaf truck, a rear coil truck.
Coils, yeah, and that was the bigger challenge with this one. Comes with installing the coilovers in the ride tech kit, because the coilover, or the trailing arms in a 3/4 ton have an awful lot of reinforcements in the frame that get in the way of doing a C-notch. And so I had to take all that stuff out, which is not an easy process. That stuff is not designed to come out. So there's an awful lot of work that goes into drilling out the old rivets and pounding them through and getting them out of there. I mean, I suppose if you had a plasma or something, it would go a lot easier. I didn't. But that is definitely a task.
Yeah, the hardest part of any of these things that we're talking about is 100% nothing is second compared to drilling and getting rivets out that have been in a truck for 50 years that were put in there to never come out. And once you get the technique down, for me, it was a X cut, star, grind, punch, X star, grind, punch, and it's daunting. Nobody wants to do that. I know if you have a really badass, air hammer, that helps, and a little bit of, PB blaster to loosen those up. But yeah, same thing on Orange Slice and every other truck that I've done, anything like that, you're going to modify it and put new stuff in it. It absolutely sucks getting those things out.
Yeah, my best method for that was drilling a pilot hole through the center of the rivet and then hitting it with an air chisel on the side. I didn't bother with cutting a groove in them or anything like that, and it worked out fine. But again, driving the shank of the rivet back through the hole again, especially when you're trying to eliminate a reinforcing plate that's inside the frame, because when you smack it, the plate just moves and then comes back. So you almost have to put a clamp or something on it to keep it from moving. That probably help. But
well, and for the audience, don't let the trailing arm versus leaf spring stop you. They're all going to be fine. The only thing that would change really is you're going to take it all out is your rear axle. You'll cut your spring perches off because you're probably going to convert it to coil anyway. So, but if you upgrade to a Ride Tech, a QA1, a React, the different companies that are out there now, the CPP, so many companies have come up with a very, very just high ingenuity coilover style kit that will reinforce everything.
yeah,
So your rear end on this truck, is this your truck? Is this small back window? It is small back window, yeah, because it's 67. You have the big 14. That's a boat anchor on there for sure.
Oh, the HO52, the E.
Yeah, those
Oh,
things are just those things are garbage.
yeah, it was not worth me keep. Well, I didn't want it anyway. I wanted a 12 volt.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. I found from the same place I got the truck. I knew I needed a 12 volt, so I asked the guy. It's got this great big wrecking yard. It's very cool. It's the kind of wrecking yard you don't see anymore. You walk in this place and it's 3 cars stacked high, so close together you can barely walk through them, and all the stuff that's in there, it's like A bodies, so GTOs and Chevelles, things like that. There's Blazers in there. There's short bed trucks in there. There's Corvettes in there. The reason it's all there is because it's so packed in, you can't get any of it out, which is fascinating, right? Anyway, so I asked him, I said, I needed a 12 volt. He says, I got one. And I go over and look at it, and it's been sitting with the cover off of it on the ground in the dirt, with filled full of water for who knows how many years. And so I bought that from him when I bought the truck and was able to take it over and get it dipped so that it was not rusty anymore. It was basically white metal when I started with it. And I had to do some repair to it. One of the perches had wallowed out a little bit. So I had to fill them up, weld them up, and re-drill the holes and all that. But when I was setting up the axle with the last book, the 7387 book, I had worked with a guy that I knew who was a long time axle gear setup guy, right? He was the guru for GM, for Toyota, for all axle setups. And he walked me through the process. He was nice enough to let me come to his shop, show me what his methods were after having done it for years, and let me take pictures for my book, right? And that was wonderful, but he's since moved away. He wasn't around, and I couldn't get in touch with him. And so it was interesting. I had to make a decision. All right, well, I'm just going to build my own 12 volt. We did it in the last book. I should be able to do it this time on my own. And it was funny. I was trying to Google something. I don't remember what it was. I was looking for, I think it was some kind of a spec for backlash or something. And what came up was my own book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd never had that happen before. It was interesting. So I was able to set up my own axle basically just by walking through the process, same as everything else. It's much of an art as it is a science to set up an axle. And but I went and bought my own press to do it and all the right tools and everything, and it worked out just fine. But again, it's not that challenging if you just take your time and follow the instructions, right? It's not that challenging.
Well, and I want to throw this out. So I don't think that it would be a problem if you're going full Jim and you're going to do everything that you did. But in 71 on these trucks, they went to disc brakes up front. So 71 and 72, the rear axle is an inch and a half wider.
Yeah.
So sometimes guys want the narrower axle so they can do a little more tubbing, if you will, offset of their wheel. And so that I wondered if you figured out what year you had and did it really matter because you were
Well,
converting to disc brakes anyway. So it probably
yeah.
all worked out, but that's a big deal if you're getting into that stuff and you're like, well, do I want the narrower one or do I want again, it's 3/4 inch on each side because 71, 72, when they went to the disc brakes, they pushed out that by going to disc, they pushed everything out 3/4 of an inch front, left and right. So that's why they matched the rear.
I think it was late 70 that they swapped them over. This one ended up being the wider of the two. And it didn't really matter to me because you can buy the axles for either one that's 5-on-5. And I knew I needed it to be 5-on-5. So I was just going to buy whatever axles I needed to make it work. So for me, it didn't matter. But yeah, you do have to keep that in mind when you're going to build one of these things, especially if you're sourcing the rear axles to get the one that's the right length for what you're trying to do.
And honestly, that might be one of the biggest things. Like everything else is going to be, and you're going to make small mistakes, but that's okay. It's not going to be anything that's dire. And the thing about that is how wide is my axle and what is my offset going to be on my wheel and what kind of wheel and what am I looking for and am I going to tub it and so on and so forth. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's a thing in there in the book about sort of a junkyard spotter's tip on how you tell if it's the narrow or the wide without axles in it, and it's in the book. I think there was a measurement that you take from the mounting perch out to the face of the drum, and I don't remember
yeah.
off the top of
And
what
I
it
don't
was.
either, but the forum that used to be all over the forum because that was something when I did a conversion on a 3/4 ton or a 69 or something like that. I can't remember on one of my trucks that I built. Um, you've got a square body in here
Yeah.
for stock sway bars.
Mhm.
And is that at your junkyard that you're talking about? Because
No, so
that
that was a U-Pull-It not far from my house, and I just happened to be there looking for something else, and I saw it, and I thought, well, there's one right now. I'll take a picture of it. No,
you
the
need to go
junkyard.
you need to go back and see what's going on with that truck because that truck's like an Indy truck.
I know. That's why I was so interested in it.
Well, did you see if it had the 76 inner door panels?
It was didn't have any door panels on it, and the next time I went back, it was gone. They'd crushed it.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
I
that's
know.
I mean if they didn't have so they have a little 76 tab that's on those door panels. That's super cool. So that's cool. Too bad that got crushed. There's even some good I love white bumpers. So, damn it. Damn it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you get into deciding all your front, your coils, what you're doing. Um did you struggle with deciding how far to take it apart and then paint and powder and really get into those control arms or where were you at with all that?
I knew that it all had to come apart. I mean, this truck was basically two frame rails on jack stands in my garage. I took it all the way down. So I wasn't too concerned about something like that stopping me really. I mean, I knew I had to take it over and get the frame media blasted and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was not any kind of a worry for me to tear it all the way down.
Well, and I feel like if you know that that's going to happen, because the problem with these trucks is that once you start doing something, it's so easy to I kind of relate it to like a house. You're like, well, I'm already this far. I might as well do this. I'm not going to pay somebody else to come back and fix this plumbing or fix this leak or fix this electrical. I might as well just keep going. So it ends up being the quote unquote snowball effect where you have to just keep going. So know that going into it that you are probably going to get in, not necessarily over your head, but what ends up happening is you're going to get deeper than you probably think about it. I always, again, is like a home show where they're like, oh, just apparently the foundation's just cracked. And you're like,
Yeah.
the foundation's cracked on every house and it's going to be $20,000 more. And you're an idiot if you don't go into the build thinking that. So yeah, take that personally. If I'm calling you an idiot, I'm telling you because so many people have been there that it's gonna happen. These are 50-year-old trucks. Have fun. And the other thing really kind of probably comes down to just real estate, right? I used to say,
Yeah.
hell, if you have a 20 by 20 garage, you're going to utilize like anybody who does that is that it's insane because you really just need real estate to take all the freaking parts so that you can have the elbow room to get in there and do what you need to be doing. So you're going to have to stack those somewhere. So mama's car's coming out, or the side of the yard is going to be utilized with cabs and fenders and hoods and everything else so that you can move around.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is knock over a fender, especially if it's an original paint fender, and damage it, right? You'd hate yourself if that happened. Um, I talked a lot about this at the beginning of the book, and that's coming up with a plan, right? And figuring out what it is you want to do, what it is you're going to be able to do, because those aren't always the same thing. And then figuring out your path forward, right? And a lot of that is you can think about it some of it ahead of time, and try and come up with your plan. And that will help, because there's no more expensive way to build a truck than to do it twice or 3 times or 4 times. You know, if you change your direction midstream, it's just going to mess you up. So yeah, I mean, it comes back to understanding what it is you want to do, and then budgeting properly for it. And you know, you might do some of it now and some of it later, and it could snowball over the course of however many years. But there's a lot you can do to these trucks while still driving them. You know, you don't have to tear it all the way down to a frame rail.
Did you have your plan and your vision? And when you look at that truck, are you 90% equalized? Or did you have a few things that you changed?
I knew that I wanted it to be on coils, actually from the last time you and I talked, because the last truck I built was on airbags. Um, I knew I wanted it to be on coils. I knew I wanted it to have big brakes. I knew I wanted it to be LS powered. Originally, it was going to be an automatic. My wife is very much a fan of automatics, not so much of manuals. I didn't want to have a hot rod that didn't have a clutch, so that changed. And otherwise, no. I mean, what you see is pretty much what I was expecting it was going to be.
How about white bumpers? I love white bumpers. Was that because it was a C20 and it started that way?
I wanted to make shaved bumpers.
Mm.
So a good buddy of mine, his name is Ben. He worked with me at the auto shop back in the day when I was still wrenching. He has I think it's a 72 that he bought way back in the day, and it's slammed down on the ground. It's blue with a white top. It was a small block truck. He's since put a big block in it, and it had, I think they were 15 by 15 tires in the back. The thing was tubbed.
Wow.
And yeah, it was very cool. But that truck had shaved bumpers on it. The bumpers are body color, and the guy who had built it cut all the heads of the bolts off. And I thought, well, that's really neat. So I decided I wanted to do that. The problem, of course, is you can't do that as easily on a truck that's got a chrome bumper, unless you want to go and have it re-chromed. So I knew right out the gate that I wanted a truck with white bumpers. This one had white bumpers, but they were completely mangled, right? And so I didn't want to try and fix those ones. What I ended up doing was I went to Classic Industries, because they're one of the only suppliers I was able to find that actually had reproduction painted bumpers, and sourced bumpers front and rear from them, and then made my own shaved bumpers.
Nice. Are you required to have a front plate in Oregon?
No, you're not. Well, let me back up. You're not required to have a front tag in Oregon if you're on special interest registration, which I am. That's why that truck has 1970 stickers on it on the front.
Nice. I just wondered if you thought about not having a plate bumper versus, because you were doing all that as the audience. I'm sitting here looking at the front of it. He has a plate, and like Arizona, you don't have to have a plate. So sometimes guys will just go with a non-plate bumper, especially if you're modifying and cutting it up.
I thought about it, and I actually almost did it. But I really liked the way that the bumper slopes down in the middle and then back up again on the lower line.
Yeah.
I wanted to leave that alone, and I knew that I was going to have a problem without having that front plate, just because it's Oregon and that's what they do here.
Yeah, it's like pumping your own gas, which I just heard the other day that you don't have to. They changed that law. Thank God.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, what a horrible law. I like it. I like that you documented that. You documented that you could do that and how you could have a shaved bumper in the book. And that was something when I was a kid. I remember a guy had a Blazer and he did that, and they shaved it and they chromed it. You could afford it back then, so pretty cool. So you went with the CPP lower control or spindle, which is the world's most produced front spindle, getting that drop out of there and narrowing everything, bringing it in. Chassis looks good. The funny thing about the book, as I was going through it, is now how many books there are. If I think back, and you go back to Kevin's first book, now all these books are in here, and you're like, it's cool that you reference them because I don't know when I first interviewed Kevin with his first book, but now since you have a couple books, he's got a couple books, Kevin Tetz has got a couple books. So you have all these, you've got Whips, you've got you've got, Kevin Tetz, and it's like all these different guys have books. So you have resources, a plethora of them.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to try and promote their work as much as I can because they've got skill sets that I don't have, and I want to make sure that if somebody who's building something like this has the best information they can get.
So you did your coil over. It looks like you don't have a plasma cutter, and what you did for the cross member. So for the audience with the front cross member, that's what your control arms hook up to, and you've got to cut a hole in the top of it so that it can accept that coil. You chose, or because of what you had at your resources, was to use the death wheel and just very slowly work your way and make that. Um, did you end up cleaning that up a little bit? You have a little. Yeah, I assumed you did. I just don't see the
So
picture.
here's the challenge with this book. I had probably 50 more pages of content that I
Oh,
had really
you had to cut it down.
had to cut it down. So that section had an awful lot more in terms of steps. And one of those ones was getting in there and cleaning it up. But that was one of the ones that I knew I could get rid of because there was other stuff that was more important. But yeah, what I found for me was scoring it with the death wheel and then pie cutting it all the way around. I think I used a Sawzall for that. And I took a pair of ice grips, start working it, and they just pop right off.
Yeah,
Super
and
easy.
you've got the little waffling there to give you the marks.
Yep.
The cool thing about it, and it sucks that you did end up having to cut some of that out, but is that you have, and I've done Ride Tech. I'm a fan of what they do, but you
Mhm.
have better instructions probably than they do.
I don't know about
Oh,
that.
it looks pretty good. Obviously, we're spoiled with your color, your step-by-step process, or for my Canadian friends, my process. Yeah, no, it looks really good. I'm not saying they have really bad directions. I know some companies. There was a suspension company that I used back 15 years ago. You got nothing. You got
Yep.
nothing, and I'm just like, what am I supposed to do here? And yeah, you got to kind of figure it out. Thank God for the forum because you could just jump back and forth on the forum.
Right.
Another thing that you did, and for the audience, once you get into this chassis stuff and you're starting to cut these rivets, with the new tubular rear trailing arm for your coilover setup, but depending on how much you're going to hot rod it and race it, you can get a frame stiffener now. You can really um, strengthen that middle frame if you're running a stock style frame.
Absolutely. And I think if I could go back and do it again, I would add a frame stiffener simply for the fact that it doubles up over the section where you cut the frame. If you shorten the bed or if you shorten the body or shorten the chassis, I mean, getting a frame stiffener in there will also help to bring all of that together and make it even stiffer so that you have even less of a worry about whether or not everything's going to be as good as it was from the factory.
Sure. And if you're gonna, really put the power down and kind of have a race truck, you are a coil over truck, you can go out there and bang some gears and have some fun. There's plenty of options out there that companies, all these chassis companies can get you hooked up if you need to strengthen that, have an inner frame stiffener.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely do one if I could go back now. I don't want to have to do my exhaust again. That's why I haven't done
Yeah,
it.
and that's a great point because that's what ends up happening or ends up kind of getting in the way is once all that's done, those pipes have got to be run through what's left. And that's the difference between your rear trailing arm setup and then the old days. What we would do is we would cut a circle out of the factory rear trailing arm cross member, cut our little 2.5 inch, 3 inch holes, put our piece of pipe in there, and then guys would run their exhaust through there. So that was a little bit different. Whereas yours is now a tubular setup and gives you that option to run your exhaust right through there.
Way more room. Yeah, I can't say enough nice stuff about Ride Tech and their setup. It works really well. And I mean, even if you've got a 3/4 ton frame, it bolts right up.
The thing about their C notch that's really cool too is, and you had your bed off, so it worked out, but that C notch is made so you don't have to lift your bed off. You actually can slide it in and then notch it. The only difference is why I would say if you're at this point, you might as well just take the bed off. I know that could even be intimidating for people, but get some buddies to help you. Is that then you can utilize the top space to stiffen it up too. It doesn't require it, but you might as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so any challenges with your suspension?
No, the suspension goes together quite easy, and the thing rides wonderfully. I mean, it's night and day from what it would have been originally. I mean, obviously it's a 3/4 ton truck, but even the coil, I mean, the coil spring rear trucks have a pretty nice ride from the factory. This thing is night and day from that.
Yeah, and for the audience, what I would sell you on is if you don't want to put a coil rear end, which is going to be a trailing arm conversion for rear end, is just upgrading to the Ride Tech shocks. Those will make a big difference. So he's absolutely right. That was the big thing where Ford had their independent I beam set up, and then Chev had their rear trailing arm set up, which kind of a car setup. They do ride phenomenal, but if you want them to ride even better and maybe a little stiffer, especially because you've got the bed, which can be empty, and you can, adjust those rear shocks. So they're not cheap. They used to be about 175 a piece. I bet they're probably now about 220. Fox took them over, but they do make it ride a hell of a lot nicer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so brakes and steering, I mean, that's pretty much, I'll let you have the open forum on that. I mean, you're gonna upgrade no matter what, because your
Yeah.
truck was drum on drum.
My truck was drum brakes and it needed everything. All the lines were bad. The master was bad. I mean, I started with basically a cabin frame. So the Bear system, which I used, the 6 piston front and rear, is fantastic setup. Works really well. Bolts right up. So in terms of installation, it's really straightforward. And I again, I couldn't be more pleased with how it turned out. Now, as for steering, that was more of a challenge because I had to decide what I wanted to do. And I think a lot of people have the same problem. There's a lot of companies out there that are making rack and pinion conversions for these trucks, which are great, but they also have some drawbacks in terms of sometimes they're a little bit challenging to mount. You have to figure out how you're going to run your steering shaft, what's going to be in the way, your exhaust may be in the way. Um, so there's things to think about. And for me, I wanted to use a factory style steering box. And this truck's a 67 frame, meaning it's not set up for a power steering box at all. It would have had Ram style power steering if it had had power steering back in the day. And so I had to modify the frame, and that's another section that I had to shorten up a little bit. But with this one, I just used a torch and a couple of hammers and heated up the frame and made a dimple in that section where the steering box bolts up to the frame, and it's good to go. So this stuff is fairly straightforward, and that Borgeson steering box is great, nice and tight. You wouldn't know that it wasn't rack and pinion, in my opinion, just by driving it around. It's very, very well done.
Yeah, and you'll, for the audience, have to make that decision on your own. Um, a lot of times on that 67 frame chassis, so for the trucks that had the power steering, it does have four little dimples where you'll put your box to. You can, with a flat flush frame, I think they also have some spacers that you can
Right.
mount there to give you that little bit. But um I'm sure it's probably, I know who just came out with a new steering box I just saw. Oh, Detroit Speed. So
Yeah.
Detroit Speed just came out with a new one too. So the Borgeson is going to be an upgraded one. There's plenty of options out there for that. And then obviously, like you said, the Mustang 2, which is going to be your rack and pinion, there's
Mhm.
options there too. The other thing though, you stress about that is having it, where's it going to hang? Do I want it up high? Am I going to notch my chassis so that my control arms, or I guess my rack and pinion, can reach my control arms, my end links. So that's the other option there. One thing that I really like that you went into, and I wish I was better at this, and this just comes down to my patience and me just doing it, but is you really got into your brake lines. I like that you did that.
Yeah, it's necessary. I mean, and again, making brake lines, it's not the most fun thing in the world. It's one of those things where you have to measure and measure and measure and make sure you get it right before you start bending stuff and cutting stuff. But if you have the right tools, it's kind of, I won't call it fun, but it's definitely not nearly as painful. And for me, I've got I'm using the Eastwood flare tool, the one that mounts up in the vise and you pull the handle, and that's top of the line. I mean, it really, really works well. You can get a flare, perfect flare every time. I use that to make all my fuel lines, all my brake lines, some of my power steering lines. It's I couldn't say enough about how nice that system is in terms of being usable and making sure you get repeatable, nice flares every time.
Did you have a few that you had to redo?
Nope, never
Wow.
had to redo it. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So you become a master at that. The other thing about that is I wonder what you use to kind of clamp them. Did you figure out a real nice clamp? That's always the thing, right? You've got these lines and you're looking at different diameter, and then it's always like, what's the latest and greatest system to clamp brake lines, fuel lines, and secure those to, said frame rail.
Yeah, so the ones on the brake lines are stainless steel clamps that are basically just a stainless steel collar that goes around them and bolts to the frame. And the ones that I used for my fuel lines are similar, but they have a rubber isolator as part of them to keep the fuel line from vibrating.
Yeah, yeah. So, you went through, how's it stopped now? How are you just loving it?
Yeah, yeah. If you breathe on it too hard, it'll send you through the windshield. It's good. The nice thing about big brakes isn't so much about the. I mean, they have great stopping power, and the thing stops better than anything else that I have. But the fact that they are so big and they are slotted and drilled, it's repeatability, right? You can get them really hot, and they don't really get really hot. They just keep being effective. They stop over and over and over and over again without fading. So that's I think the big thing. And this truck, I mean, it's brake overkill. It doesn't weigh that much to need brakes that big, but it's one of the fundamental things that I talk about in the book is that if you're going to build something like this, you're going to drive it regularly. Other people in other cars are not going to be paying as close attention as you might want them to when you're out driving around. I mean, part of the reason I sold that K10 that I restored, even though it was orange and white, is that nobody could see it. And I was constantly worried I was going to get run into. And that driving that truck, and I talk about this actually in both books, driving that truck in that kind of situation on a daily basis really drummed into my head that you have to be able to have more power, you have to steer better, and you have to stop better than everybody else because they're not paying attention. And to them, insurance is going to cover their plastic bumper. But if you just spent a month making your own shaved bumper, it's a different story.
Yeah, you got a little more skin in the game and a little bit more care, and
Absolutely.
you'd hate to lose something like that by not having the right upgraded. I will say that Bear makes an amazing brake. There's other options out there for you guys. You don't have to, this is the top of line setup. So when you think about the Bears, the Willwoods, React, or I guess I should say AZ Pro, their Revelator kit makes a 1314. CPP makes a very good kit, and there's a lot of options out there for you. So don't feel like you have to break the bank. And honestly, depending again, what you're doing, you can go over to Napa and you can, GM brakes are good. But remember, I need a new rotor when I'm doing everything else. I don't want to just be slapping some old rusty rotor on there and putting new pads on and thinking you're good to go. So upgrading those calipers, upgrading the whole system, even if you're just doing stock style, is probably sufficient unless you have a big motor, which we're going to get into that because more motor means more braking.
Stock style is almost always sufficient, and you can very easily upgrade your braking performance just by getting more aggressive pads and shoes. I mean, you can still have drums in the back and just get some better friction materials. It's night and day just doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things I talk about a lot in the book. This is what I did, but this is not necessarily the only way to do it. There are so many things that you can do, and I try to cover as many of them as I can before I lead into here's what I did. And brakes are a really good example of that. I mean, just some green stuff pads on a factory caliper will make a big difference.
Yeah, and the hardest part to me, and it's such a vanity thing, is if you know what wheel you're going to run, and if you're going to run a 10-spoke US Rambler and you're going to have an openness at all, then you got to put some shine there. You got to have, mom's got to have some nice shoes. You can't
Right.
have cheap GM brakes if you're running a nice slot wheel, a nice Rambler, a torque thrust, whatever it is, whatever you float your boat. If you're like, hey, I'm going to run a solid, I'm going to run a Detroit, I'm going to run, again, a US solid, something that is stock style that you can't see the brake, then you could probably go a little cheaper on that and get some of the performance versus, hey, this thing needs to look hot. It can't just be, shitty brakes because people
Yeah.
could see that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. How many times have we seen spray painted rear drums? It's easy, right? On Picacho, which was my 68 that I did, half of the stuff I'm talking about is, yeah, I just ran out of money and I did the big brake kit at the time. It was McGoy's had I don't even know what it was, 14-inch or something. I did that on the front. And then did I end up doing rears? No, I did end up doing the rears on that. Must have been another truck. Yeah, I did do the rears on that. Because I did their e-brake. That's right, because you have to do like a Cadillac or Corvette. So I did the e-brake on it. Whereas different trucks, you just spray paint the drum and throw the wheel on there, and you're good to go. So, all right, get into the engine. The engine for you and I, we're not going to dive into that too much because that's such a powerful, chapter for the audience that needs to really get into. And at this point, hell, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't just LS anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, walk us through your decision on that, but that's not something we're going to really dive into because that's almost a book on its own.
Yeah. And I knew it needed to be LS. And I wanted to use the Holley components in order to install the LS. So the pan that they make is great. The 302-2 is what I used. All of their mounts are fantastic. They have mounts for the earlier 67s like mine, because for those of you that don't know, 67, there was no big block available. And so the frame rails are not clearanced the same way in 67 as they are in 68 and newer. I ended up clearancing mine, so I used the later parts, but they have the early ones too. But yeah, I knew I was going to run an LS motor. I knew I wanted it to be, about 400, 410 horsepower, somewhere around in there. And, it's not hard to get there with an LS. It's a lot harder to get there with, your standard small block. But again, it's not impossible. It's easy to do. But for an LS, for a driver, something you're going to drive across the country, you're going to take everywhere. LSs don't run hot. They make good power. They pretty much always start. There's a lot to like about the modern stuff. I know it's not for everybody, but for me, it was what was going to happen.
Well, I think it is for you and everybody in the perspective that once this truck is like completely Frankenstein the way you did it, and I don't mean that negatively, you built it like a complete Lego set. You had it, you got to build it the way you wanted. So doing it that way, if you want the reliability, the technology's there, the information's there to do the LS is really a no-brainer. For like Orange Slice, I would love to put a LS in it, but at the same time, it's got the original big block, so I just don't want to take the original heart out of the truck to put an LS. I do, but I don't.
Nothing sounds like a big block, even in
Yeah.
stock. They're unique in a lot of ways, and I don't blame you. In fact, if I had a good small block, I probably wouldn't swap that either. But I do have to say, I really, the two LS trucks that I've built now, I get it. I know why everybody wants to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you put a different cam in yours, right?
I have not opened this one up. No, this is the crate motor. I got it from GM. It's the LS 364 450, and it's basically an LQ9 with LS3 heads and an LS6 cam in it from the factory. Comes without anything else. There's no intake on it, none of that stuff. So I put the Holley high ram on it. I put large stainless headers on it to get it to really breathe as best as I could, and then put a 102 millimeter throttle body on it. I think they're 46-pound injectors, if I remember right. And yeah, I just wanted a motor that would make the best use of the LS3 heads as possible, flow as much as it could, and just see what happened with it.
You did the H pipe, which is huge. So just like you said, you've got the right injectors. Well, now we got to get rid of all that heat. So you put the H pipe in there, and that probably sounds just gnarly.
It's noisy. It sounds good though.
What muffler?
Those are Summit Racing. I don't remember what they're called. They're two-chamber. They're basically just two-chamber mufflers from Summit.
I wonder if
Not
they're kind of like a Flowmaster or how they
like
sound.
yeah, they're like a Flowmaster, but they're not very expensive. I think they're like, I don't quote me on this, but if I go back and look, they're probably $35 a piece, something like that. They're not super expensive, but they are effective. And they basically, like I said, they sound like a Flowmaster 2-chamber.
And you did a limited slip on this too, right?
Yes, it did. It's got
Or a posi?
Summit Racing posi. Yeah, so it was
Yeah.
their in-house branded pause traction unit, and I put 373s in it and set it all up here in my home shop.
Yeah, that's the key for that rear end, having that posi.
Yeah.
No more one wheel peel. And then you decided to go with stick, right? So going manual, no more automatic. Was that a challenge at all?
Not really. I mean, the TKX kit, I got it from Silver Sport Transmissions, and they have very detailed instructions and a very nice setup for these trucks when it comes to all the hydraulics to make it all work. The pedal assembly. I mean, it comes with everything. It comes with a pedal assembly, cross member, everything you would need. I mean, it even comes with the fluid to set the whole thing up and make it function. I did convert this truck from a low hump floor to a high hump floor, and I only did that because I wanted to have access. It's so much easier to be able to take the hump off and get in there and see what you're doing. You can get to all the back of the bolts on the back of the engine from inside the cab if you want to, which is nice. So that after having done it, it's not necessary for a TKX. Those transmissions are just not that big. But for access sake, I think it's worth doing.
I would have thought that it would have. I know. So in Yellowstone, put a 4L80 in it, and it's not a high hump, and it's touching practically. And then my son has a 66, and he has a TR 660, and I believe we're gonna put the high hump in there. I believe we're gonna have to. So I like what you're saying. Hey, I just want to have accessibility. The only thing is, I like that, but that I don't want to pull the carpet either. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't blame you on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
for the audience, just know that the two-wheel drives have a low hump, four-wheel drives have a high hump. You can cut out the low hump, and then aftermarket, they pretty much all availability now for a high hump four-wheel drive, because you'd have to have the transfer case and clearance, and that gives you that availability.
yeah, and the TKX is not a large transmission. It was designed from Tremec to be used in aftermarket applications, particularly for cars that have tight transmission tunnels that would have had Muncies from new. So it's really it would have fit without it, but like I said, having that access is really nice.
Well, and you're already there, so there you go. So you
Wonderful.
could, yeah.
And it was another thing I could show people how to do. So
What about your clutch?
the clutch was another one that came with the kit. I didn't have to specify anything special. It was part of the unit, and I believe they use McLeod clutches these days. And I don't know if that's what's in it or not. I think that's what they were using at the time.
And you upgraded your old pedal. You got rid of all that.
So what's funny is the truck had the clutch pedal in it already because it was a 3 on the tree. And with the Silver Sport kit, it just comes with a new pedal assembly and the new bushings that pedal rides on. And the pedal's already drilled in the proper place to work with their hydraulics that go through the firewall. So for me, it was just a no-brainer to swap it over because I didn't have to drill a hole in the other one. So I just did.
Well, the old setup is kind of ornery looking. It's old, and so you were able to kind of modify that. But and then the other thing, right, is where to put your H pipe. Is it clear? And you got your transmission. And from the pictures, it does look pretty small compared to like a big old huge 4L80 or something.
Well, the last one I did was the Super Magnum 6-speed that I had in the other truck. And that one required me to kind of hack the floor up a little bit and make it fit. And I thought, well, with the truck geared the way that I was going to gear it, I didn't necessarily need that 6th gear for what I was going to do with it. So I went with the 5-speed. And again, I mean, the TKX is a great transmission. It's really slick shifting. It can take a lot of power. It feels like the Super Magnum 6-speed, like a T56 in the way that it shifts because it has the same shift forks. So internally, it's pretty similar. It can hold a lot of power. I think it's something like 700 horsepower. It's a pretty stout unit.
Interior turned out awesome. Looks really clean. You kind of kept that old school style. You went with a nice blue carpet, and then you added AC, some vintage air.
So we talked about that the last time too. With regard to the trucks, and it kind of goes back to the very original thought on this whole book was, the people like these trucks because they feel like old trucks, and everybody's got memories of these old trucks, and everybody, kind of has that rose-colored rear view of what it was like to own one of these things way back in the day. And to me, I wanted to keep the factory bench seat because it feels right in these trucks. I wanted to keep the factory gauges, same thing. They just kind of feel right to me. And So with regard to the interior, I went with as much stock stuff as I could. It all came from Classic Industries. It's all super high quality stuff, and it all just fit. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do with an interior of one of these trucks, but you start to get away from the what makes them feel the way they feel in some ways, I feel like. And so for me, that's why I went with what I went
So the one thing that I would disagree with you on is,
with.
and I love, because you're a purist and I feel like I'm a purist as well. I've been completely and totally converted to the Dakota Digital RTXs
Yeah,
only because they have the OG style. I love my information center that they provide me, and my eyes just suck compared to what they used to. And when I jump in an old truck and I have that foggy, and you rebuilt your cluster, so you put a tack in it. It looks like, yeah, you put a tack in it.
yeah,
So did you put a tack in it?
I did. Yeah, an 8,000 RPM tack.
Okay, so yeah, you put a tack in it. Um, man, hey, I'm gonna tell you 100%. They're a sponsor of like two of my podcasts. I If they weren't, I would still tell you guys the same damn thing. Is they're not
Yeah,
cheap. The RTXs are not cheap, but it is one of those things where it is so easy to put in, and it is I just love having that information, that visualness, that light, and then really be able to just go on road trips and click through and have my trip, how much fuel do I have left, my percentage. I get all my digital readouts, what's my temp, what's my RPM. And so once you go Dakota, you don't go
never go
back
back.
because you get so spoiled.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely, and they are in the book.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I think if I had had more space and more time, I probably would have done. One of the things I like about these gauges in this truck in particular is that they've aged at the same rate the truck has. And so if you look at the orange needles, they're basically completely faded on the top and nice and bright on the bottom.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for that. But again, I mean, it's kind of silly for me to sit here and tell you that I like, everything's stock on the inside, but I put an LS motor in it and six piston brakes and coilovers and all that nonsense.
Hey, you
It,
said it, not me. I'm just saying, because you got LED lights on the outside, but you're not
yeah,
running old halogens. So you said it, not me. I'm just saying, I'm just reading the book.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It comes down to personal taste. And again, I mean, this is the kind of stuff, once you have one of these trucks, you don't have to build it all at once, right?
Yep. Yeah, you can easily go back and add that cluster. Um,
Yeah.
and honestly, even with stock gauges, I've pulled those needles, put a little model paint on them, clean them up just so you could see them a little bit better, and go through it, put new light bulbs. It's that back in the old days, I just haven't done it in a long time, was fun to take
Yeah.
apart your whole cluster, clean it, and put little new bulbs in there. Paint your needles orange, get them all nice and bright and shiny. We used to get the new lens, right? Because your lens was all old and scratched, so you get the new lens. So rebuilding those clusters is still fun and still can really provide some pop.
Yeah.
It's just not it's just not Dakota Digital pop, but it is pop. So for you guys out there, if you're like, hey, I don't have the money, just rebuild it. Have fun with that.
If I don't have the money yet,
Yeah.
run these for a while, swap it over later.
Yep. Yeah. Run that and a
On
little
the
bit
shelf.
of what is it? Tester. Tester was the model paint, a little tester, little orange, hugger orange tester. And I think it's like 8 little, I don't know, 1107s, or I can't remember what those little bastards are, but clean them up.
1157s. Yeah.
Well, 1157s are the big dogs, I think. And you talk about that too. You got some different things in there. All right. So vintage air, getting into your air.
Yeah.
Did you struggle or did you care? Or I like the old school, the bigger 4.5s on the side. You went with the smaller ones.
Yeah. I wasn't too concerned about that so much. The smaller ones for me, it was just easier to install, and I wasn't too worried about using the factory style. Again, that it sort of contradicts what I was just saying about the gauges, but for the AC, that's what I went with, and it worked out well. That kit is very, very straightforward to install. Everything about it is turnkey. I think it is probably one of my favorite things that I have in the truck now. It makes it so much easier to use over a stock one, just in terms of being able to see out of the thing when your defroster's running, not necessarily having to crack a window to get the fog to go out. That kind of stuff is, you learn to live with it when you have a stalker and you're using it in all the weather, right? But it's nice to not have to worry about it.
Well, and on a 67 to 72, those old, you're running your levers and that old wire is just hanging up and you've lubed it and you've cleaned it up and it's bent. And then you get a vintage air system and you just slide that thing, just like sliding into some hot chick's DM. No, I don't do that. It's a joke. Just slide that lever. You just slide that thing over. It's so nice. It's so instantaneous. Yeah, such a smooth, clean upgrade. And it's another reason why we're so spoiled that we can modernize these trucks with an LS power plant, with Dakota digital gauges, with vintage air, AC, interior, and you get a lot of those creature comforts that you don't quite have when you're really still in your stock, 1972, 1967, whatever it might be. Those little things do make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing that I would ever say I wish they could figure out, and obviously with wing windows you can do this, but I the thing that I love about stock AC is that I get my stock vent where
Yeah.
you lose that, and you can obviously just roll down a window, you can crack your wing window, whatever it is there. Sometimes you can even pop, if you've got a rear slider, you can pop that. But that's the biggest thing that I don't love that you lose is your fresh air versus, because in Arizona we have pretty good days where I just want a little fresh air, but at the end of the day, it is super nice having that real nice AC. And the other thing too, when you upgrade, is that compressor doesn't just suck half your horsepower down because you've got a new, especially with their fifth gen stuff. But yeah, that an old compressor will just crank your horsepower down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so then you upgraded your cooling. Yeah, you really went through it with the motor, everything. You upgraded your lighting. How
Mhm.
how are you loving that when you drive down the neighborhood and you
These,
turn those lights on?
so these are Dapper Lighting OE7s. They are glass, which I really like. They're LEDs. They have a pretty cool running light. They have a little 194 bulb inside them that you can change it to an amber one if you want it or whatever. You can get a little LED if you want. And I've wired mine into the turn signal switch or the turn signal circuit. So, or the running light circuit, so that when your park lights are on, the little halos are on too, which is nice. And yeah, I mean they're wonderful. They're as bright as my Denali pickup, or brighter, and it's got HIDs in it. So
Yeah.
there you go. And the thing I like about LEDs versus using a more standard halogen with a relay, is that you don't have to use a relay. These things don't draw that much power. So I completely rewired this truck with American Auto Wire's kit, which is a fantastic kit. If you're looking for something, that's the one to go with. I love that kit. And was able to not have to do a whole lot to make the headlights work. You just plug them in and go. It's fantastic.
The one thing that I've noticed when you do convert, that if you ever came into a problem, would be that because there is no draw, you almost have to get the not really a resistor, but you have to get the reducer, right? So because you're like, why is this not working? Well, it's because they don't even draw any power, and it's used to drawing a higher power. So you have to have that LED reducer.
Well, one of the things that I found was the I was having a hard time getting my turn signals to function properly when I set all this whole thing up.
Yeah.
And come to find out, the problem was that one of the little 194 bulbs in the dash for the indicator was burned out. And that took out the entire circuit, because the LEDs, apparently they need that resistance to make them function properly. Once I fixed that bulb, everything worked just fine.
Oh my God, what a headache. You were just chasing your tail on that, I bet.
I thought I had a bad socket. I thought I had a wire that was broken somewhere, which everything was new. So, I didn't, I went through everything it took me about 3 days to figure it out. And once I figured it out, it was kind of, well, that was stupid. That's a no brainer, right? Why didn't I check that first? Well, there you go. Now I know.
Yeah, that's not an easy one, especially if everything's put away, right? If the gauges are all put away, bolted up. I'd rather take a 67 to 72 gauge cluster out than a square body. It's a little bit square bodies they're a little daunting compared. They're a little just more fragile.
Yep.
I'm always so worried about it, just cracking everything. Um, all right, so then kind of in conclusion, I like your little 13th chapter here. You've got the finishing touches. You've got some cool rear view mirrors, some shaved door handles, some Fessler glass. Obviously you didn't really do much of that. You did really showcase how you did your smooth bumpers, which is awesome. That's such a killer upgrade. Anything else that you kind of will do as you kind of work forward?
Well, the truck's pretty much done now. I did do some more paint touch up to the bed. So I used automotivetouchup.com for paint. And the reason I did that was because they can provide basically any color that you want right out of the GM color code from the year. And it's delivered to your door. So you don't have to go to a paint store. Their color matches are guaranteed and they're right on the money. And so for me, I was able to just go ahead and get some of that. And we painted the bed with that stuff. And it was really quite easy to distress it to make it look like the front fender. And the paint went down smooth, but it wasn't so thick that you couldn't bust through it pretty straightforward, pretty easily without, having to sand it, which was nice. So that worked out really well. I was really impressed with the quality of the paint and the way that it worked to make the patina look the way it looks.
Wow, I did not know that they were around, and I wonder the other thing is, can you get that in a spray can, in a rattle
Yeah.
can?
It comes in a rattle can if you want. It comes in, I got both rattle cans and quart containers. We use the quart containers to spray the whole bed. I used the rattle cans when I was doing the door jams around where I replaced the rockers. And you wouldn't know. The color's the same. So
So you had to send them their code. Do they have all the codes? Like for example, with Orange Slice, it's called Special Orange, and I've got a few of these trucks. And yeah, that I'd be blown away, but maybe I'll have to challenge this and see if they can make it.
if you have a GM color code, they can make it.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
there really isn't. It's like 001. There is no color code. It just says special orange or special paint on there. On I have three of these orange trucks in there, and they all are pretty much the same. I'll look again. But
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
If you can figure out maybe off the build sheet if there's anything other than 001.
Well, the other
Um,
thing that's a hard one to match is your ochre and your Spanish gold, which is the same. Your difference is your 6772, then your square body, right, is Spanish gold. But in a lot of your emblems and stuff like that, it'd be interesting to see to have a little bit of that and have that on hand.
yeah.
Yeah, that'll be I'm liking that one. So how'd you find those guys?
I've worked with them before on a couple of other projects. I did a 65 Mustang and they provided some paint for that for a how-to project in a magazine I was working on. And then they provided some paint for my 79 when I was working on that. I did some rust repair in one of the door jams and they supplied a color that wasn't quite right. And they sent me another can a couple days later that was right on the money. So it's definitely something to look into. I know it sounds funny to people who paint cars probably for a living to get paint that's been mixed, sent to you in the mail, but it does work. And it's
Hmm.
a good option for spot filling or spot painting something that's got original paint. If you don't want to paint the whole side of the truck, if you just want to fix something, some small piece of it, you're going to do some door jam repair, this or that, whatever it might be, it's a really good option for that.
Well, and one thing that you did that I really like is, and another option is just cutting off your fuel cell and you can leave it so it looks like there's a fuel cell there. Another thing I will see people do is they'll leave that there and then you can undo your cap and then have even like a little charger so it'll wire right to your battery if you want to put a
Yeah.
trickle charger there, so stuff like that. You did the right thing. You covered that up, you matched it, and
Mhm.
then you put the tank in the back.
Yeah. So the tank is a Blazer tank that I got from Classic Industries, and I used Holly's module for the mounting the fuel pump inside the tank, um, and was able to make it all work with I think it was Carolina Custom makes the bedside filler, and I liked using the bedside filler because if you put it in the floor of the bed, you can't put anything in the bed and then go get gas. And I'm not saying I'm going to go haul yard debris with this thing, but it's nice to have the filler neck over to the side in a place where you can get to it. And I also didn't. I've never been a fan of putting it behind the taillight because to me, fuel fumes and any kind of an electronic anything don't mix. I don't want to put the cap or the vent right near where your taillight is. If you get hit, to me that's kind of a non-starter. So I put it inside the bed. And what I found was when you use a Blazer tank, it's got a real small filler neck, right? The inlet is not very large, and a lot of these companies will send you like a 2 inch or inch and 3/4 size filler that you have to figure out how to connect to that smaller Blazer tank. But what I found out, and it's in the book, was that if you use the the filler neck out of I think it was a 47 to 54 Chevy truck. It's the same diameter, and it fits inside that unit where it bolts to the side of the bed, and it's got a factory style cap on it that looks like it would have been in this truck from new.
Yeah,
And it's the same diameter.
that's a good little tidbit there.
Yeah, yeah, it
Because
worked out.
because those blazer tanks definitely are wider and then narrow down, so that's kind of a flaw in the design. I do feel like a lot of people are, at this point now, are going to use like a Boyd tank or something like that. Did you look at doing that, or I feel like you did that on your square body?
I didn't have to swap. Well, let's see. With the square body, I used a Tanks Inc. tank that
Okay.
had fuel fuel pump inside it. And with this one, I wanted to use a blazer tank. I wanted to see how I could make it work with fuel injection, because that's what I feel like most people are going to use. You can get the aftermarket tanks, from a lot of different sources, but they're a lot more expensive too.
Yeah.
So for me, I wanted to see what I could do with the factory style stuff.
So besides maybe adding a frame stiffener, what would you say if I said, "Hey, right now we're going to lay out the plan. Give me two more things you would do different."
Other than the frame stiffener, um, I might get a later model seat that has a little bit more foam. The early seats are not particularly comfortable, but they do have that old truck feel.
Mhm.
So that's one thing, and I put shoulder belts in it. I haven't done that yet. I need to.
Oh,
This
okay,
thing,
that's cool.
yeah, it still has its factory 67 seat belts, which I like, and they've got all the patina that you could want on them. But I hold my kids in it. They love it. They want to all be picked up from school. Both of them want to be picked up from school in this thing over everything else. But I feel like I should probably put some shoulder belts in it before I do that too much more. Even though I did move the tank out of the cab specifically for that reason. I thought it was probably safer to get the fuel away from the seat, but
Yeah, you
seat
hear it
belts.
sloshing around back there, you smell it. Um, what did you
Yeah.
say? You
Oh,
said
I got one more
some
for you. Now that I think
okay.
of that. Other thing that I would do for sure on this thing, I would put in some different inner fender liners in the front, because with the way that it's set up right now, it is as low as it can go, and if I hit a bump hard enough, it'll change lanes on the freeway.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you need some sloshers.
Yep.
Um, Another guy, and I can't remember if they worked anything, but my buddy Blake Stoner does. He makes the inners, they look just like the stock, but they go up quite a bit. So they look like a 67 72. But either way, there's plenty of options out there now between Slosh, Heart Fab, Stoner. I don't think he markets those, but they do look. He bought that from Hills, which is in NorCal, and they look just like the stock a stock OG fender, but they give you that a little bit more. I'm running the Slosh mids in Orange Slice, and I do hit every now and then, and I'm not as low as I can go on my coilover setup, but definitely my left
Yep.
front fender, it'll and I'll hit the tire and it'll rub, and so yeah, you get a little burn on that. What I was going to
Yeah.
say when you said about your seat was that I would
Mhm.
suggest, if you, depending on the look and whatever, but you can put I did this on Yellowstone in all four spots where, there'd be four people sitting, and then in the back as well. But I had the guy that built the seats put memory foam in there. So
Oh, interesting.
so we cut out regular foam and then slotted in memory foam. And man, those seats were, I mean, I drove that thing so many to Texas 3 times. And yeah, I was so comfortable the whole time. So if you're thinking about that, maybe go to when you're going to recover it, if you can, for the audience, put a little memory foam in that little butt seat and that back spot. It might give you a little bit more, it might feel a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall though, you got to feel just great about the truck.
Yeah, it's a great driver. I love taking it out, taking it to car shows, taking it to Cars and Coffee, taking my kids to school in it. It is exactly what I wanted it to be, which is something that you can take out and drive anywhere at any
Yeah.
time.
And not stress, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not something you got a $30,000 paint job on. You can go rip it. And in today's world, people just love that patina. I love the white. I love the way you balanced all that. Did you give it a name?
no, I haven't given it a name at all. I probably should though.
The only other thing I would wonder, and I kind of looked at it when you're in your throughout the book, but did you struggle with doing a black firewall, and did you think about painting that to match because you
Thought about
already
it.
were matching some of that?
Yeah, I thought about it. The reason I did that was because the bottom of the hood was covered in some I guess it was surface, yeah, mostly just surface rust. It
Yeah.
was dirty. The firewall was in pretty good shape when I put it all together, but I wanted it to all kind of match. So
Yeah.
that's why I went black. And it's some people hate it. To me, it looks cleaner. So that's what we went with.
Well, and I think you see that a lot. So I don't think it makes everything else pop. You've got a beautiful LS in there. It's I always, somebody else said it. I didn't. I just probably use it more than that person, but it's the old jewelry box, right? Here's your ring, babe. And you pop that open and you're like, damn, look at that motor. It's a beautiful motor with that high rise intake that you have. And have you since dynoed it at all?
Yeah, I took it out and had it dyno tuned, and it was just over 410 at the wheels, so it worked out just fine. It was interesting because this one I didn't crack into this motor at all. The other motor that I built was for the other truck was an an LQ9 base, same idea, but it had 799 heads on it, and I had a Lingenfelter cam in it, and it had that trick dual plenum intake from Holley with twin throttle bodies. This one is lower compression. That one was 11-1. This one's 10.3-1. It's got a much smaller cam, but way bigger heads. And it still basically outdid the other one just in the head design, I think is where it is. It's all about the volume going into the motor and the design of those LS3 heads over the 799s. So
Wow.
what are the good heads worth? There you go. It's more power.
Well, and I think if I remember right, you upgraded those heads on that other on the square body.
The other one it had whatever the factory LQ9 heads were, and I put the 799s on it because I wanted it to have a smaller combustion chamber, so that it would have higher compression.
Yeah.
I was trying to push it to 11-1.
What about your drive line? You went with a one piece?
Yeah, this has got a one piece in it. I had a local company here make it. It's got 1350 joints on the front and the back. So yeah, it was strong as I could get it.
So what's next? Do you think you'll go out and rip this thing pretty hard, or what's your break in and how's all that going?
Well, I finished the book about when did I file it? I filed it in 2021, I think it was. So the truck's been done for a while. I've been driving it as much as I can. I need to take it on a longer road trip. I think one of the things I want to do is take it back to the place where I got it up in the Tri-Cities and show it to the guy I bought it from. We can see how far it's come. He's seen some photos of it, but I want to drive it up there. It's about a 5-hour drive from here. So I think it'd be a good trip for it.
Oh yeah, and let him just see it and maybe jump in and he'd be like, "There's no way this is the same truck."
Yeah, he sent me some photos of some more trucks he's got. So if there's anybody out there looking for one, they're not rusty up there.
Yeah, well, there's definitely people. It's just I think half of it's just getting up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's called Dan's Garage up in the Tri-Cities in Washington. It's got a great website.
Dan's Garage. Is it like dansgarage.com or do you know what
Yeah,
it
it's
is?
dansgarage.net.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm sure the audience will be happy to peruse up there and check it out because at this point we got to start saving all these things because they're just sitting and some of that might be fun to get a hold of some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The time is now.
Well, speaking of that, the time is now. I'm going to go eat dinner, and you, my friend, are going to go to Hawaii in the morning. So, thank you so much for always making time for us. And yeah, we love the insight, we love the knowledge, we love the experience, and that you do such a great job of really putting that down on paper and broadcasting that for us all to see. I think this book's going to do really good for you. I think the 67 to 72 trucks are never going to go away. I think they're going to be as popular as can be as long as they let us have dinosaur juice in them and we can keep buying that for an affordable rate. I think Chevrolet 67 to 72s and GMCs are going to do fine, and I think your book's going to do great. How do you think that the other book ended up doing overall? Were you really pretty
Yeah,
pretty pleased?
it's been doing well. That I just found out about a month ago that it's gone into a second edition, so they're printing more of them, and it's gotten good reviews. So yeah, I'm happy with how it turned out, and hopefully this one will do as well.
Yeah,
We'll
I
see.
think it will do as well, if not better. When it goes into a second edition, does that mean that do you know, like, hey, that means the first run they did 10,000 or something?
Yeah, they sold all the ones that they printed, and it was time to print more. And they allowed me to go in and make some changes. So I found some of the mistakes I made and fixed them. The kind of stuff that pops out after you've gone to press that you never see ahead of time, and then it bothers you every time you look at it.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was I gonna? Oh, from the pod perspective, that pod does really well. So when I look at the numbers and I see it, you're like, wow, that people really enjoyed that. So that one got plenty of traction on our end. So that's good that people are listening and liking it. And I think this will be the same way.
Fantastic. Well, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Have a great trip to Hawaii. Again, Happy New Year. Appreciate your time. Love the book.
Thanks so much.